In the quiet town of Oak Ridge, Mississippi, a single event sets off a chain reaction that will challenge the community's beliefs, test its resilience, and change lives forever. When a young boy, Jaden Carter, is tied to a tree by a police officer in an act of humiliation, the small town is forced to confront its own divisions and reckon with the truth about justice. But what happens when the boy's mother and a powerful judge step in? How does the officer, Bryce Langley, face the fallout as his actions ripple through his personal and professional life? And can a divided community find common ground in the wake of pain and anger? This is a story of courage, redemption, and the power of resilience in the face of injustice. Stick around for a journey that will move you, challenge you, and leave you with a sense of hope. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Jaden's or Langley's shoes? Let's dive in. Oak Ridge, Mississippi, sat nestled between sprawling cotton fields and dense pine forests, a town small enough for every face to seem familiar, but large enough for unspoken divisions to fester. Its streets wound through neighborhoods that seemed stuck in different decades. Downtown boasted a charming row of brick shops and a courthouse that looked as though it had leapt from the pages of a history book. Yet, only a few blocks away, potholes marred the roads leading to the older neighborhoods, where change arrived slower than the seasons. It was here that Officer Bryce Langley began his day, driving his patrol car through the familiar streets. Bryce liked his routines, even if they made his life feel small. He stopped by Randy's diner each morning for coffee, the staff greeting him with the deference reserved for those in uniform. "Morning, Officer Langley," May called from behind the counter, sliding his coffee across the polished surface. "Morning, May," Bryce replied, his voice gruff but not unkind. He stirred in a packet of sugar, his mind on the day ahead. Bryce was a creature of habit, and Oak Ridge suited him that way. But the town was changing, and he felt it in the way people looked at him. More protests in nearby Jackson had spilled into the news, reigniting old debates about law enforcement and race. Bryce didn't like the scrutiny. He told himself it was because outsiders didn't understand the job, but deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. Across town, Evelyn Carter poured herself a cup of coffee, savoring the brief quiet before her day began. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon toast and brewing coffee, a comfort amid her hectic schedule. "Jaden, let's go," she called, glancing at her watch. Her 13-year-old son, Jaden, appeared moments later, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "I'm ready, Mom," he said, grabbing a piece of toast on his way to the table. Evelyn smiled. Jaden was bright and full of energy, a stark contrast to her calm demeanor. As a federal judge, she'd learned to keep her emotions tightly controlled, but with Jaden, she allowed herself glimpses of softness. "Excited for debate practice?" she asked, watching him devour his toast. "Totally. We're going to crush regionals," he said with a grin. Then, more seriously, he added, "Mom, do you think anyone will even care if we win?" Evelyn's smile faded. "What do you mean?" Jaden shrugged. "It just feels like no one pays attention to the stuff we're doing. They care about sports or drama. But debate? It's like we don't even exist." Evelyn reached across the table, her hand resting on his. "Jaden, what you're doing matters. Speaking up and standing firm in what you believe, that's how real change starts. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Jaden nodded, her words settling over him like armor. That afternoon, Jaden and his friends gathered at Oak Ridge Park, their notebooks spread across a picnic table as they practiced their arguments. The park was their usual meeting spot, a place where they could be loud without bothering anyone. "Okay, what about environmental impact?" Jaden asked, gesturing animatedly. "If they bring that up, we need a solid counterpoint." "We could talk about renewable energy investments," his friend Marcus suggested, flipping through his notes. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a police cruiser pulling into the gravel lot. The boys fell silent as Officer Langley stepped out, his boots crunching against the ground. "Afternoon," Langley said, his eyes scanning the group. "Afternoon, sir," Jaden replied, his voice steady. Langley's gaze landed on a spray-painted bench nearby. "You boys know anything about this?" "No, sir," Jaden said quickly. "We're just working on school stuff." Langley frowned, his hand resting on his belt. "You sure about that?" Because it looks to me like you've been hanging around here a while. Jaden felt his pulse quicken, but kept his tone calm. We didn't do it, officer. We've been here working on our debate practice. Langley stepped closer, his expression hardening. You got a smart mouth on you, kid. Jaden clenched his fists, fighting to keep his composure. We didn't do anything wrong, he said, louder this time. Langley's face darkened. That's so. He reached for the zip ties on his belt. Before Jaden could react, Langley grabbed his arm and marched him toward a nearby tree. His friends watched in stunned silence as the officer bound Jaden's wrists behind his back, securing him to the rough bark. You need to learn some respect, Langley said, his tone mocking. This is what happens to punks who think they're above the law. Jaden's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and fury coursing through him. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them back, refusing to let Langley see him cry. Unbeknownst to Langley, a jogger had stopped nearby, her phone raised as she recorded the scene. After what felt like an eternity, Langley cut Jaden free. You're lucky I'm letting you off easy, he said, tossing the zip ties into the trash. Jaden said nothing, his jaw tight as he walked back to his friends. Jaden's mother was waiting when he got home, her sharp eyes immediately catching the tension in his posture. What happened? She asked, her voice calm but firm. Jaden hesitated, then told her everything. As he spoke, Evelyn's expression darkened, her anger carefully controlled. We're not letting this slide, she said when he finished. But we'll handle it the right way. No shouting, no rash decisions. Understand? Jaden nodded, though part of him wanted to scream his anger to the world. Evelyn sat in her home office late into the night, trying to concentrate on a case she was preparing. Legal briefs were spread across her desk, but her mind kept returning to Jaden's story. She could feel the familiar weight of righteous anger pressing against her ribs. Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from a local community group on social media. The title of the post read, Oak Ridge Officer Harris's Teen in Park. Evelyn's heart sank as she tapped the link. The video was grainy but clear enough to show Jaden tied to the tree, Langley's mocking voice audible in the background. The caption read, This is what happens in our town. Are we okay with this? The comments poured in beneath the video. Disgusting. This is abuse. Typical kids causing trouble. They got what they deserved. This officer should be fired. Evelyn set the phone down carefully, her fingers trembling. The anger she had held at bay now threatened to overflow. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Control your emotions, Evelyn. You'll need a clear head for this fight. By morning, the video had reached every corner of Oak Ridge. At the diner, where Langley sipped his coffee and read the paper as usual, he noticed the stares. What's all this about, Bryce? May asked cautiously, placing his breakfast in front of him. Just people stirring up trouble, Langley muttered, flipping the page of his paper. But his appetite was gone. He could feel the eyes of the other patrons boring into his back, whispers following him as he left the diner. Across town, Evelyn and Jaden sat in their kitchen, the tension palpable. Jaden scrolled through his phone, his expression a mix of anger and humiliation. They're defending him, he said, showing his mother a comment that read, This is what happens when kids act like thugs. Don't waste your energy on them, Evelyn said, her tone calm but firm. Focus on what we can do. Jaden nodded, but the words lingered in his mind. Evelyn spent the next several days building her strategy. She contacted a civil rights attorney, Carla Watkins, whose name was known in legal circles for her work on police accountability cases. It's a solid case, Carla said after Evelyn briefed her. You've got the video, and the officer's actions were clearly excessive. But cases like this are uphill battles, especially in towns like Oak Ridge. I'm aware, Evelyn said, but I'm not backing down. This isn't just about my son. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again. Carla smiled. I can see where your son gets his determination. Let's get to work. Meanwhile, Jaden began channeling his emotions into writing. The first time he picked up his pen, he didn't know where to start. But as the words began to flow, he felt a weight lifting from his chest. Bound, not broken. Silenced, but not defeated. The roots of justice run deep, and they cannot be cut. He shared the poem on social media, and it quickly gained attention. Messages of support poured in. Thank you for sharing this. You're so brave. Keep fighting. But there were also messages of hate, accusing him of exaggerating the incident or blaming him for being in the park in the first place. It's not fair, Jaden said one evening, showing his mother the comments. Why do they hate me for just being me? Evelyn hugged him tightly. Because some people are afraid of change, Jaden. But you don't let them win. You keep speaking your truth. The following weekend, a group of local activists organized a protest outside the Oak Ridge Police Department. The crowd was small but determined, their chants of justice for Jaden echoing through the streets. Jaden and Evelyn attended, standing near the front of the crowd. A reporter approached them, microphone in hand. Jaden, how does it feel to see this support? She asked. Jaden hesitated, then said, It feels good to know people care. But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. As the protest continued, a counter-protest formed across the street. Supporters of the police held signs that read, Back the Blue and Stop the Witch Hunt. The tension was palpable, but the protests remained peaceful. Evelyn watched the scene unfold with a quiet resolve. She knew this was just the beginning. At the police station, Chief Harold Timmons called Langley into his office. The older man's face was lined with stress as he gestured for Langley to sit. This video's become a problem, Timmons said, sliding a printed screenshot across the desk. Langley glanced at it, his jaw tightening. It's taken out of context, he said defensively. The kid was mouthing off, and I acted within protocol. Timmons sighed. Even if that's true, it doesn't look good. The mayor's been fielding calls all morning. People want your badge, Bryce. They don't know what it's like out there, Langley said. These kids don't respect authority anymore. Be that as it may, you're on desk duty until we figure this out, Timmons said. Langley stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're throwing me under the bus. I'm protecting this department, Timmons replied firmly. Langley stormed out, the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on him. As the protests gained momentum and the legal case took shape, Oak Ridge became a town divided. Evelyn received both praise and criticism for her decision to pursue justice. Some called her a hero. Others accused her of stirring up trouble. Late one night, as Evelyn reviewed legal documents, Jaden appeared in the doorway. Mom, he said quietly, do you think we're doing the right thing? Evelyn looked up, her expression softening. I know it feels overwhelming, Jaden, but standing up for what's right is never easy. Change takes courage, and you've shown more of that than most people ever will. Jaden nodded, her words settling into his heart. Oak Ridge simmered with tension as protests outside the police station grew larger. On one side of the street, activists held signs with messages like Justice for Jaden and End Police Abuse. Across the street, counter-protesters waved flags that read Support Our Police and Back the Blue. Jaden and Evelyn attended every peaceful demonstration, their presence symbolizing resilience. Jaden kept his head high despite the shouts from the opposing crowd. Go home, kid, a middle-aged man yelled. Stop blaming the police for your bad behavior. Evelyn placed a steadying hand on Jaden's shoulder, her calm demeanor anchoring him. Across the street, Bryce Langley sat in his car, watching the scene unfold. The chants for justice reached his ears, growing louder with each passing day. Each protest chipped away at the confidence he once had in his position. Langley's suspension hit harder than he expected. At home, the atmosphere was tense. His wife, Beth, tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for their two daughters, but the strain was evident. One evening, after the girls were in bed, Beth confronted him. Bryce, what were you thinking? Tying that boy to a tree? Langley sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. I was doing my job. They don't see what we deal with every day. Beth's eyes softened, but her voice held a note of warning. Bryce, you need to think about the bigger picture. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about our family and this whole town. Langley didn't respond. He stared out the window, the protests echoing in his mind. Jaden's poem continued to gain traction online, shared by activists and civil rights groups. Messages poured in from across the country, some offering support, others full of venom. In school, Jaden's classmates treated him differently. Some looked at him with newfound respect, while others avoided him altogether. "Hey man," Marcus said one day at lunch. "You're famous now." Jaden shrugged. "Famous for what?" "Getting tied to a tree." "You're more than that," Marcus said firmly. "People are listening to you, Jay. That's power." Despite Marcus's encouragement, Jaden often felt overwhelmed. The weight of being a symbol for justice was heavy, and some days he wished things could go back to the way they were. Evelyn met regularly with Carla Watkins, the civil rights attorney handling the lawsuit. Together, they worked to build a case against Langley and the Oak Ridge Police Department, citing negligence and misconduct. "Langley's history is our strongest point," Carla said, pointing to a file of complaints that had been quietly dismissed over the years. "This isn't his first offense, and we can prove a pattern of abuse." Evelyn nodded, her jaw tight. "This town needs to see the truth. Too many people have been hurt because no one held them accountable." The town council held a forum to address the growing unrest. The community center was packed with residents eager to voice their opinions. Evelyn and Jaden sat near the front, listening as people stepped up to the microphone. A young woman spoke passionately about her own experience with police harassment. "This isn't just about one boy. This is about a system that lets people like Langley act with impunity." On the other side of the room, a man in his 60s stood to speak. "We can't vilify the people who protect us. Officer Langley made a mistake, but he's a good man." The room buzzed with tension, the divide between the two sides palpable. When Evelyn spoke, her voice carried above the noise. "This isn't about choosing sides," she said. "It's about accountability. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their community, no exceptions." Langley felt the walls closing in. His suspension meant long hours at home, where the silence was deafening. Beth began spending more time with her parents, taking the girls with her, leaving Langley alone with his thoughts. He turned on the news one evening and saw Jaden reading his poem at a protest. The boy's words cut deeper than Langley expected. "Justice grows from roots that cannot be cut. No matter how tightly you bind, the branches will rise." Langley turned off the TV, but the words stayed with him. For the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong. One night, Evelyn received a call from Carla. "We've got a break," Carla said. "A former officer from Oak Ridge is willing to testify. He says he left the department because of Langley's behavior." Evelyn felt a surge of hope. That could change everything. The former officer, a middle-aged black man named James Hill, met with Evelyn and Carla the following day. "Langley's been like this for years," Hill said. "I filed complaints, but they always got swept under the rug. He's protected by the Good OL Boys Club in that department." "Are you willing to testify in court?" Carla asked. Hill nodded. "If it means stopping him, I'll do it." Evelyn sat with Jaden one evening, the weight of the case bearing down on both of them. "Are you okay, Jay?" she asked. Jaden looked up from his notebook, where he was scribbling a new poem. "I don't know. Some days I feel like we're making a difference. Other days it feels like nothing's changing." Evelyn reached for his hand. "Change is slow, Jaden, but every step we take matters, even if we can't see it right away." Jaden nodded, her words giving him a small sense of comfort. The protests in Oak Ridge began to shift focus. Activists organized voter registration drives and community forums, channeling their energy into actionable change. Jaden spoke at one such event, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "We can't just talk about change," he said. "We have to be the change. That means voting, organizing, and holding people accountable." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time, Jaden felt a glimmer of hope. Bryce Langley sat in the corner of his darkened living room, his mind replaying the moment at the park over and over. He had justified his actions to himself countless times, clinging to the belief that he was simply doing his job. But the more he thought about the look in Jaden's eyes, equal parts fear and defiance, the harder it became to maintain that illusion. Langley's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from his wife, Beth. "We need some space, Bryce. I'm taking the girls to my parents for a while." He threw the phone onto the couch, his chest tight. The life he'd built was unraveling, and for the first time, he began to wonder if he had brought it on himself. Despite his growing platform, Jaden struggled to reconcile his newfound role as a voice for justice with his own feelings of vulnerability. Late one night, He sat on his bed, scrolling through social media. While most of the messages were supportive, the hateful comments stung deeply. One message read, "Stop playing the victim. You're just another punk looking for attention." Jaden closed the app and buried his face in his hands. He wanted to be strong, to live up to the expectations placed on him, but some nights the weight of it all felt unbearable. Evelyn found him sitting in the dark and sat beside him. "Talk to me, Jaden," she said gently. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom," he admitted, his voice cracking. "What if they're right? What if I'm just making things worse?" Evelyn wrapped her arms around him. "Jaden, you're doing something most people never have the courage to do. You're standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. That's not weakness, it's strength." Jaden nodded, her words a small balm to his frayed nerves. The controversy surrounding Jaden and Langley spilled into other parts of Oak Ridge life, including the local school board. Parents attended the monthly meeting in record numbers, many demanding that the school take a public stance on the issue. A woman stood to speak, her voice shaking with anger. "Our children deserve to feel safe, whether they're at school or in the park. What happened to Jaden Carter is unacceptable." Another parent countered, "And what about our officers? They're under attack just for doing their jobs. We need to teach our kids respect for authority." Jaden attended the meeting with Evelyn, watching the arguments escalate. Finally, he stood to address the board. "I'm not here to divide anyone," he said, his voice clear despite the lump in his throat. "I'm here because what happened to me isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one else has to go through it. We can do better as a town. I believe that." His words were met with a mix of applause and murmurs, but the sincerity in his voice left a mark on many. One afternoon, Carla Watkins received an email from an anonymous source claiming to have information about the Oak Ridge Police Department. The sender alleged that several complaints against Langley and other officers had been buried to protect the department's reputation. Carla forwarded the email to Evelyn, who read it with a growing sense of anger. "If this is true, it's bigger than just Langley," Evelyn said. "This could expose systemic issues in the department." Carla nodded. "We'll need to verify the claims, but if we can, it changes everything." Oak Ridge's once close-knit community was now fractured. Longtime friends found themselves on opposite sides of the issue, and the tension was impossible to ignore. At the grocery store, Evelyn overheard a conversation between two women in the produce aisle. "They're blowing this whole thing out of proportion," one said. "Langley's been a good officer for years." The other woman shook her head. "Good officers don't tie kids to trees. That boy deserves justice." Evelyn kept walking, her jaw tight. She knew change was never easy, but the growing divide in her town weighed heavily on her. At school, Jaden's friend Marcus found it harder to keep his temper in check. During a group project in history class, a classmate made a snide comment about Jaden's poem. "Maybe if you spent less time writing and more time behaving, you wouldn't have gotten in trouble," the boy sneered. Marcus slammed his fist on the table, his face red with anger. "Say that again, and see what happens." The teacher quickly intervened, pulling Marcus aside. Jaden found him later, sitting on the bleachers after school. "You can't let them get to you, man," Jaden said. Marcus shook his head. "I'm tired of this, Jay. Tired of them acting like you're the problem, when it's people like Langley who are ruining this town." "I get it," Jaden said quietly. "But we can't fight hate with more hate. That's not how we win." Chief Timmons called Langley into his office for a private meeting. The chief's face was lined with exhaustion, the weight of the town's unrest visible in his posture. "Bryce, I need you to understand something," Timmons said. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the department, the town, everything." Langley bristled. "So, you're throwing me under the bus?" Timmons sighed. "No one's throwing anyone under the bus. But the truth is, your actions have consequences, and we're all feeling them. You need to take responsibility for what happened." Langley stared at the chief, his mind racing. For years, he had been protected by the department's unspoken code of loyalty. Now, that shield was crumbling. In the midst of the division, a group of local clergy organized a candlelight vigil in the park where the incident occurred. Jaden and Evelyn attended, joining a diverse crowd of residents. The soft glow of candles illuminated the night as speakers took turns sharing stories of resilience, and hope. When it was Jaden's turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. "I want to believe Oak Ridge can change," he said. "But change doesn't just happen. We have to fight for it every day. And that fight starts with listening to each other." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time in weeks, Jaden felt a sense of unity in the air. As the protests continued, small signs of progress began to emerge. The police department announced plans to implement bias training for all officers, and the town council began discussing the creation of a civilian oversight board. Evelyn knew these were only first steps, but they were significant ones. "We're not done yet," she told Jaden one evening. "But this is how change starts, one step at a time." Jaden nodded, a spark of hope reigniting within him. The air inside the Oak Ridge courthouse was thick with tension as the civil rights lawsuit against Langley and the Oak Ridge Police Department officially began. Jaden sat with Evelyn and Carla Watkins, their legal team meticulously prepared. The defense attorney for Langley, a sharp-tongued man named Richard Givens, began his opening statement. "Officer Langley is a decorated officer with years of service to this community. This case is about a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, not malice or misconduct." Carla countered, her voice unwavering. "This case is about accountability. Officer Langley violated the dignity and rights of a 13-year-old boy. His actions reflect a larger systemic failure that cannot be ignored." The courtroom buzzed as the battle lines were drawn. Jaden felt the weight of every gaze in the room, but Evelyn's steady presence beside him gave him strength. On the second day of the trial, Jaden was called to testify. Dressed in a crisp shirt and tie, he stepped to the stand with his heart pounding. Carla approached him first, her tone gentle but firm. "Jaden, can you describe what happened at the park that day?" Jaden took a deep breath. "I was there with my friends, practicing for debate. Officer Langley came up to us and accused us of vandalizing a bench. When I told him we didn't do it, he grabbed me and tied me to a tree." Carla nodded. "How did that make you feel?" Jaden hesitated, then said, "Like I didn't matter. Like no one cared what I had to say." When Givens cross-examined Jaden, his questions were sharper. "Isn't it true that you've been vocal on social media, criticizing the police? Could your feelings about Officer Langley be biased?" Jaden met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I speak out because what happened was wrong. That's not bias, it's the truth." When it was Langley's turn to take the stand, the courtroom grew silent. He avoided looking at Jaden as he spoke. "I've been a police officer for over 20 years, Langley began. "I've made mistakes, but my goal has always been to protect this community." Carla stood for her cross-examination, her voice sharp. "Officer Langley, did you believe a 13-year-old boy posed a threat that required him to be tied to a tree?" Langley's jaw tightened. "At the time, I believed I was de-escalating a situation." Carla pressed on. "De-escalating by humiliating a child? By ignoring his right to dignity?" Langley faltered, his earlier confidence slipping. "I didn't think it through." His words hung in the air, a partial admission that sent ripples through the courtroom. James Hill, the former officer who had come forward about Langley's past, took the stand next. His testimony revealed a troubling pattern of complaints that had been dismissed by the department. "Langley has a history of targeting people of color," Hill said, his voice steady. "I filed reports about his behavior, but nothing was ever done." The defense tried to paint Hill as a disgruntled former employee, but his credibility remained intact. His words cast a shadow over Langley's years of service, painting a picture of a system that had enabled misconduct. As the trial unfolded, the town of Oak Ridge buzzed with speculation. Some residents defended Langley, citing his years of service and the pressures of the job. Others, moved by the testimony, began to question the department's practices. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered daily. On one side, signs demanded justice for Jaden. On the other, banners declared support for Langley and law enforcement. Jaden watched the protests from a courthouse window during a break in the trial. "It feels like the whole town is watching," he said to Evelyn. "They are," Evelyn replied. "And that's why what we're doing matters." One evening after court, Evelyn encountered Langley outside the courthouse. He was sitting on a bench, his shoulders slumped. "You've got what you wanted," he said bitterly as she approached. Evelyn stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "What I want is justice, Mr. Langley. For my son, for this town, and maybe even for you, if you're willing to face what you've done." Langley didn't respond, but her words lingered as she walked away. After days of emotional testimony, closing arguments were delivered. Carla urged the jury to see the broader implications of the case. This isn't just about one boy. It's about ensuring that no one in this community is made to feel powerless or less than human. The jury deliberated for hours before returning with their verdict. Langley was found liable for misconduct and ordered to pay restitution to the Carter family. Additionally, the Oak Ridge Police Department was mandated to implement reforms, including the establishment of a civilian oversight board. The courtroom erupted into mixed reactions. Some cheered, while others expressed outrage. Jaden felt a rush of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the fight for justice was far from over. A week after the trial, Langley requested a meeting with Evelyn and Jaden. Though hesitant, Evelyn agreed. "I owe you both an apology," Langley said when they met at a neutral location. "What I did was wrong. I let my own biases blind me, and I hurt your family. I'm sorry." Jaden studied Langley for a long moment before replying. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I hope you mean what you say, and I hope you'll do better." Langley nodded, his expression heavy with regret. "I will." The reforms mandated by the court began to take shape. Officers attended mandatory bias training, and the oversight board provided a new level of transparency. Evelyn joined as an advisor, ensuring the changes were implemented effectively. Though some residents resisted the changes, others embraced them as a step toward healing. Jaden returned to his routine, balancing school, debate team, and his growing role as an advocate for justice. His poem, "A Tree Grows in Justice," was published in a national magazine, and he was invited to speak at conferences and events. Despite the challenges, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had turned his pain into power, and though the road ahead was long, he was ready to walk it. Langley's life after the trial felt like walking through an empty house where every door was locked. His wife, Beth, had yet to return home, though she allowed him brief visits with their daughters. His suspension became permanent, and the department issued a public statement distancing itself from his actions. One evening, Langley sat alone in his small apartment, flipping through an old photo album. It was filled with images from his early days on the force back when he believed he was helping people. He stopped on a photo of himself shaking hands with a young black boy at a community event. He stared at it for a long time. When did I stop seeing people like him as kids? He wondered. For the first time, Langley felt not just regret, but the stirrings of something deeper, the desire to understand. The Oak Ridge Town Council hosted a meeting to discuss the implementation of the police reforms mandated by the court. Evelyn sat in the audience, her presence a quiet reminder of the case's impact. The mayor outlined the reforms, which included mandatory bias training, the establishment of a civilian oversight board, and new protocols for handling complaints. A local business owner stood to voice his skepticism. "Do we really think this is going to solve anything? It feels like overreach to me." Evelyn stood, her voice calm but commanding. "These reforms aren't about punishing the police. They're about building trust. Without accountability, trust can't exist, and without trust, our community cannot thrive." The room fell silent, her words resonating with even the staunchest skeptics. The newly formed Civilian Oversight Board held its first meeting, inviting residents to share their experiences with law enforcement. Evelyn attended as an advisor, sitting alongside community leaders and activists. One woman shared a story about her son being wrongfully detained. "It was years ago, but we never reported it. We didn't think anyone would believe us." A retired teacher recounted how officers had once ignored her calls for help. "They assumed I was exaggerating because of my age." The stories painted a picture of systemic neglect, and the board vowed to address each case. Evelyn took detailed notes, knowing the road to change would be long, but determined to see it through. At school, Jaden began to notice a shift. Though some classmates still avoided him, others approached him with respect and curiosity. His teachers treated him as more than just a student; they saw him as a leader. One day in history class, his teacher, Mrs. Fletcher, led a discussion about civil rights. "Jaden," she said, "would you like to share your perspective?" Jaden hesitated, then said, "I think history isn't just what's in textbooks. It's what we're living right now. And we have a choice. Do we want to be the people who stand by and let things happen, or do we want to be the ones who make a difference?" The room was silent for a moment before Mrs. Fletcher nodded. "Well said." Langley began attending workshops on restorative justice, encouraged by his brother, a pastor in Alabama. At first, he felt out of place, surrounded by people sharing stories of harm and healing. But as he listened, something shifted. One man spoke about the lasting impact of humiliation. "It's not just the moment itself, it's the way it makes you question your worth. It's a wound that doesn't heal easily." Langley felt the words hit him like a weight. He thought of Jaden tied to the tree, of his own voice mocking the boy. For the first time, he truly grasped the depth of the harm he had caused. Jaden was invited to speak at a youth empowerment summit in Jackson, where he performed his poem, "A Tree Grows in Justice," for an audience of hundreds. Standing on the brightly lit stage, he took a deep breath and began. "Bound, not broken. Silenced, but not defeated. The roots of justice run deep, and they cannot be cut." The audience erupted in applause, and Jaden felt a surge of pride. Afterward, a young girl approached him. "Your poem made me feel brave," she said shyly. Jaden smiled. "That's why I wrote it. Keep being brave." One evening, Jaden found an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from Langley. "Jaden, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. Your strength has shown me the kind of person I should have been all along. Thank you for standing up, even when it was hard. Sincerely, Bryce Langley." Jaden handed the letter to Evelyn, unsure how to feel. "Do you think he means it?" he asked. Evelyn read the letter carefully. "Maybe he does," she said. "But forgiveness isn't about him. It's about you. Take your time." Inspired by Jaden's poem, the town came together to transform an empty lot into a community garden. Residents from all backgrounds worked side by side, planting flowers and vegetables as a symbol of unity and growth. Jaden visited the garden one afternoon and found Langley tending to a row of seedlings. Their eyes met briefly, and Langley gave him a small nod. Jaden hesitated, then nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step toward understanding. Evelyn was invited to speak at a regional conference on judicial reform. In her keynote address, she shared the story of her fight for justice in Oak Ridge. "This isn't just about one town," she said. "It's about creating a system where accountability isn't the exception, it's the rule. Change is hard, but it's necessary. And it starts with all of us." Her speech received a standing ovation, cementing her role as a leader in the movement for systemic reform. Months after the trial, Oak Ridge began to feel different. The oversight board gained credibility, and the police department's bias training sessions were well underway. Small but significant changes took root in the town's culture. Jaden walked through the park one evening, stopping beneath the tree where it had all started. A plaque had been installed at its base, reading, "May this tree stand as a reminder of resilience, justice, and the power of community." Jaden smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in months. Months after the trial, Oak Ridge's streets felt quieter, though the echoes of the case remained. The Oversight Board began holding monthly public forums where residents could voice concerns or suggestions about law enforcement. Evelyn attended the first forum, sitting quietly in the back as citizens shared their stories. A young black woman stood and spoke about her fears growing up in Oak Ridge. "I always felt like the police were watching me, waiting for me to mess up," she said. "But seeing what happened to Jaden and how he stood up gives me hope that things can change." Evelyn's heart swelled with pride. Her son's bravery had sparked something real in the community. Bryce Langley found himself spending most of his days at the community garden. The work was quiet, grounding, and gave him time to reflect. One afternoon, he worked alongside a local youth group planting flower. One of the boys, about Jaden's age, asked, "Why are you here? Aren't you that cop from the video?" Langley paused, considering his answer. "I'm here because I made a mistake," he said finally, "and I want to make it right." The boy studied him for a moment before nodding. Okay, just don't mess up again. Langley laughed softly. Fair enough. At school, Jaden's confidence had grown. His role as captain of the debate team brought him respect among his peers, and he used every opportunity to encourage others to speak up. One day during practice, a shy freshman stumbled through her argument, her voice barely above a whisper. Take your time, Jaden said, his tone kind. Your voice matters. The girl nodded, trying again with more confidence. Later, she pulled Jaden aside. Thanks for helping me. I didn't think anyone would care. I do, Jaden said. And one day, you'll help someone else. That's how it works. Evelyn was invited to join a statewide task force on judicial reform. Her expertise and personal connection to the Oak case made her a natural fit. At their first meeting, Evelyn presented a proposal for a program that would pair judges with community leaders to improve trust in the justice system. It's not enough to make rulings from the bench, she said. We have to engage with the people we serve. Her ideas were met with enthusiasm, and the task force began laying the groundwork for implementation. One evening, Evelyn received a letter from an Oak Ridge resident who had attended one of the Oversight Board's forums. Judge Carter, thank you for standing up for what's right. I used to feel like my voice didn't matter, but now I see that change is possible. You and Jaden have given this town hope. Evelyn folded the letter carefully, her heart swelling with gratitude. She placed it in her desk drawer alongside Langley's apology letter, a reminder of how far they had come. Jaden spent his summer interning at a youth empowerment nonprofit in Jackson. His days were filled with organizing events, mentoring younger students, and writing articles about social justice. During one workshop, Jaden led a session called Finding Your Voice. He encouraged attendees to share their stories, emphasizing the importance of speaking up even when it was difficult. A boy raised his hand hesitantly. What if no one listens? Jaden smiled gently. Sometimes it feels that way. But even if only one person hears you, that can make all the difference. At the community garden's first harvest celebration, Langley approached Evelyn and Jaden. He held a small pot of herbs, the soil freshly turned. This is for you, he said awkwardly, holding it out. It's not much, but I wanted to contribute something. Jaden looked at the pot, then at Langley. Thanks, he said after a moment, taking it. Evelyn nodded politely. It's a start. Langley nodded in return, grateful for the small but significant gesture of acceptance. Jaden's poem, A Tree Grows in Justice, gained national attention, and he was invited to perform it at a civil rights conference in Atlanta. The event brought together activists, educators, and young leaders from across the country. Standing at the podium, Jaden recited his poem with confidence. They tied me to a tree, but my roots ran too deep. The branches reached for the sun, and justice began to grow. The audience rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the hall. For the first time, Jaden realized just how far his voice had carried. Late one evening, Evelyn sat on the porch, the warm glow of the garden lights illuminating her face. She thought about the journey she and Jaden had been on, the pain, the fights, and the small victories. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Though the road had been hard, she felt a deep sense of purpose. On the anniversary of the trial's verdict, the town held a dedication ceremony at the park. At the base of the tree where Jaden had once been humiliated, a plaque was installed. This tree stands as a symbol of resilience, justice, and hope for the future. May we never stop growing. Jaden stood beside Evelyn, their hands clasped as they read the words. Do you think we've done enough? Jaden asked. Evelyn smiled. We've done a lot, but enough? That's for the next generation to decide. The work never really ends. Jaden nodded, feeling a quiet sense of pride. The start of a new school year brought fresh opportunities for Jaden. Now in high school, he joined the student government and started a club called Voices for Change, aimed at encouraging students to discuss social justice issues. The first meeting drew a modest crowd, but Jaden wasn't discouraged. Change doesn't happen overnight, he told the group. It happens because people care enough to start small and keep going. By the end of the month, the club had tripled in size. Students from different backgrounds began attending, sharing their stories and finding common ground. Langley continued his journey towards self-awareness. With the help of his brother, he joined a mentorship program for at-risk youth, where he worked with teenagers who reminded him of Jaden. One afternoon, Langley sat with a boy named Andre, helping him study for his history exam. "Why do you even care about helping me?" Andre asked suddenly. Langley paused, then said, "Because I didn't care enough before. And I'm trying to change that." Andre considered this, then nodded. "Guess we all mess up sometimes." Langley smiled faintly. "We do. But it's what you do after the mess up that matters." Evelyn's success with the State Task Force on Judicial Reform led to an invitation to testify before Congress about police accountability. It was a daunting prospect, but Evelyn accepted, knowing the stakes were too high to ignore. In Washington, D.C., she stood before a panel of lawmakers and shared her story. "My son's experience in Oak Ridge is not an isolated incident," she said. "It's a symptom of a system that needs transparency, accountability, and fairness. We owe it to the people we serve to do better." Her testimony received national attention, further solidifying her role as a leader in the fight for justice. The town of Oak Ridge held its annual Fall Festival, an event that drew residents together despite lingering divisions. The community garden, now a centerpiece of the park, hosted a booth where visitors could learn about its mission and contribute to its upkeep. Jaden volunteered at the booth, chatting with attendees about the garden's significance. "This place means more than just fresh vegetables," he told a woman admiring the rows of herbs. "It's about growth both for the plants and the people who work here." Langley stopped by the booth later that afternoon, offering a box of seedlings. "They're good for the soil," he said quietly. Jaden accepted them with a nod, their interaction brief but meaningful. Word of Jaden's club, Voices for Change, spread to other schools in the district. Students from neighboring towns reached out, asking for advice on starting their own chapters. Jaden traveled to speak at their meetings, sharing his journey and encouraging others to act. "It doesn't matter how small you start," he told them. "What matters is that you start." One student asked, "Do you think things can really change?" Jaden smiled. "They already are, and we're the proof." Langley's attempts to rebuild his personal life were slow but steady. One evening, he invited Beth to dinner, hoping to repair the damage his actions had caused their family. "I know I've put you and the girls through a lot," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want you to know I'm trying to be better for all of us." Beth studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You've got a long way to go, Bryce, but I'm glad you're trying." It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a step forward. Carla Watkins, the civil rights attorney who had represented the Carters, visited Oak Ridge for a speaking engagement. She met with Evelyn and Jaden at the community garden afterward. "You two have done incredible work here," Carla said, admiring the vibrant rows of plants. "This town feels different than it did a year ago." Evelyn smiled. "It's far from perfect, but it's a start." Jaden added, "And we're not stopping anytime soon." Carla laughed. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As spring approached, the community garden expanded, adding a small orchard and a butterfly sanctuary. Jaden spent his weekends helping with the new additions, finding peace in the quiet labor. One afternoon, Evelyn joined him, kneeling beside him to plant a sapling. "This feels good," she said, patting the soil around the tree. "It does," Jaden agreed. "It's like we're leaving something better behind." Evelyn smiled, her heart full. "That's the goal, isn't it?" Jaden was stunned when he received an invitation to the National Youth Leadership Awards in Washington, D.C. He had been nominated for his work with Voices for Change and the Community Garden. At the ceremony, Jaden stood on stage, overwhelmed by the applause. "This award isn't just for me," he said in his acceptance speech. "It's for my mom, for Oak Ridge, and for everyone who believes that justice and growth are possible. Together, we can change the world one step at a time." On a quiet evening, Jaden and Evelyn walked through the park, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. They stopped beneath the tree where it all began, now standing tall and proud. Jaden read the plaque at its base once more. "This tree stands as a symbol of resilience, justice, and hope for the future." "Do you think we'll ever be done?" Jaden asked. Evelyn shook her head, a soft smile on her face. "The work never ends, Jaden. But as long as we keep planting seeds, there will always be hope." As they walked away, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in golden light. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Thank you for listening to this powerful story about resilience, justice, and the importance of community. If you enjoyed this narrative and want to hear more stories that inspire, challenge, and move you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, we can explore more stories that spark conversations and drive meaningful change. See you next time.